Mind Your Farm Business on RealAgriculture.com is brought to you by RBC Royal Bank.
Welcome to the Mind Your Farm Business podcast, brought to you by RBC Royal Bank. I'm Shaun Haney, founder of RealAgriculture.com and host of Real Ag Radio on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. You can find more episodes of this podcast by going to MindYourFarmBusiness.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Many entrepreneurs struggle finding the right people to join their team. The employment market is very tight as supply is low and competitiveness for workers is so strong. So much attention is paid to the recruitment and finding new employees, but what about once you get them? What do you do once they join the team? What are you doing to provide orientation, onboarding, and training? My guess is not enough, and you're just like everybody else. If it takes a new employee 8 to 12 months to become as efficient as a regular coworker, why are many companies not paying more attention to nurture these early months? According to Aberdeen Strategy, only 37% of businesses ensure that their onboarding process is longer than a month, and my bet is, in agriculture, it's even shorter than 30 days. When it's so difficult to find high-quality employees, we need to give ourselves the highest probability possible of retaining great talent by installing the best onboarding, orientation, and training program possible. Yes, even in agriculture, we need to do this. My guest today on the Mind Your Farm Business podcast is Dr. Tearney Woodruff. She's an assistant professor and extension specialist in the Texas A&M Department of Agricultural Leadership, Education, and Communications. Her research interests center on the development of people as leaders, employees, and citizens. As she grounds her work in the advancement of learning, development, success, and efficacy, she seeks to support the implementation of intentional and transformative learning experiences. She's the perfect person to talk to on this specific topic. I hope you enjoy this episode on such a critical discussion. Dr. Woodruff, welcome to the Mind Your Farm Business podcast.
Thanks for having me, Shaun. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, so today we're going to talk about proper training and onboarding. I know this is something that farmers and ranchers they just don't really focus on or don't do enough of. There's a lot of room for improvement, but that's exactly why we're here today. We're going to tackle this. So from an agriculture perspective, talk about, why is this not so common?
Well, there's a lot of reasons it's not so popular, and it's not just in agriculture, but I do find that it's sort of like this is important in agriculture too, and that's an odd concept for me of the same things that we're seeing: turnover, employee retention issues, the need for training and onboarding across the board. I think it's starting to trickle into agriculture that we need this as well. That they're starting to really see the consequences. But the reason that it's a difficulty is it's the same difficulty I think everybody has, right? I don't have enough time to implement it, right? I don't know where to even send somebody to be trained. I don't even know the first place to start, or am I going to do all this effort and is it even going to make an impact? And so I think a lot of times, particularly farm businesses feel in fear of doing this and taking this on because they're not sure about the payout that's going to come from it. And two, they know their farm business, but everything HR, we're asked to be a jack of all trades when we're running a farm, and all of the HR and the people development may seem a little bit daunting for them to take on. Yeah.
I think you hit on something there, this undercurrent of I'm just going to train them and then they're just going to leave. And that's sort of, because I do hear that from some of our audience once in a while.
Absolutely. And I would counter with them, one of my favorite quotes is a Zig Ziglar quote is that, I'm going to hopefully get this right, but the only thing worse than training an employee and having them leave is to not train them and have them stay. And that's something that we can see time and again. You have an untrained employee on your farm, that's going to affect your productivity. That's going to affect your risk of injury and, all the liability that comes with that. So you can't afford to not train them, even if they do leave. But what we see time and again with statistics and research is that they're more likely to stay. And I could repeat so many numbers of how much more likely they are to stay with structured orientation and a structured onboarding, and then actually investing into their training and development, they're going to stay. And not only that, you as a business are going to not have to recruit as much because word gets out that you're a place that people want to work. You want to become that employer of choice. The dividends are innumerable.
Now, we've used two phrases here. We've got onboarding and we've got training. How are they different?
Sure. So, when I think about explaining what onboarding and training are, so onboarding is really going to be the work that you might do, the preparation you might do leading up to that person's first day, that first day through at least 12 weeks, but even through a year or two. So it's really the training to help somebody to be ready to contribute to your business. And so that can include everything from, we would say in onboarding, you should also have an orientation and onboarding. So orientation is really to help them to even get ready for training, helping them understand expectations. What are my resources? What are some policies? What is our culture? Really introducing them to your business itself and the people. And then orientation leads to onboarding, which is really helping them to be prepared for their role in your organization. So really introducing them to the tasks, on the job training, helping to prepare them to be productive in the role. Now, when we talk about that second phrase that we talked about, the training and development, that's going to be continuous. That should be throughout an employee's career. So in the same way, we hope that those who are leading the farms in different capacities are developing themselves. Maybe it's, how to be a more effective manager. Maybe they're staying up to date on farming trends and technologies that are coming out. How to best manage livestock. Maybe it's compliance issues, whatever those things are. They want to be thinking about how can they engage their employees in training that allows their business to be more productive, but also personal development for their employees that make them feel valued, make them feel invested in, make them want to give back to that organization. And so every employee needs that. And I think a key part of it is that as managers, we have to get beyond seeing that work that needs to be done and seeing our employees as a means to that, to really seeing them as a person. And in the same way, they themselves need that learning, need that investment, want a job that they enjoy going to and feel satisfaction and, worth behind it. It is the same way. And so it's really viewing a shift in how we view people. If we can view the employee first, I think that sheds a light on so many of our approaches and how we might engage in these things and recognize why those are important, because we would want them to if we were joining an organization, no matter the size of it.
Yeah, so there are examples where we are doing this. We may not just think of it this way, like the local equipment dealership puts on a sprayer clinic, or Texas A&M puts on an animal husbandry course. Like those are examples.
Absolutely. And the thing is that they're all over the place. And part of that training and development might be on the job training and development that you're allowing them to upskill and learn a new task, continue to be challenged in their role and contribute. And so it's not something that you're paying necessarily for them to do. Maybe it's even, when we talk about even personal development, maybe you're even helping an employee who's struggling with their taxes, right? Their own personal taxes. You're engaging and supporting them in that way as well. So it can be multiple levels, and it's really about what does that employee need and individualizing it for them. And that comes through relationships, which again, when you're serving the needs and understanding that your people, you're going to see that experience improve for the employee as well, and for your own productivity.
Now, when we're doing the orientation and onboarding, what's the time? Are there rules of thumb here when it comes to the time commitment? Whether that's hours of going through that process or weeks or months. Like, what does that kind of look like? Or all operations are going to be different, but we're just trying to put it into kind of a broad brush.
Yeah, absolutely. What I would say, first of all, is that if you're coming and this is the first time you're thinking about, okay, I really should be doing something is better than nothing. So having a 5-minute conversation is better than having no conversations. I think the way I see a lot of that occur is there is nothing. We just are in such desperate need of somebody to come in there that we put them right on the job. There is no conversation. There's no expectations. And then we're frustrated when somebody doesn't meet those expectations, doesn't know what they're doing, isn't trained. We want to complain about the workforce. We want to complain about all those things. And really that's our circumstances, is we're getting people who aren't as well trained and competent and prepared for the work. And so we can complain about it, or we can do something about it. Yeah. And so when you think about rules of thumb, I would say your orientation is typically a 1 day and doesn't need to be the full day. So depends on how robust you have in preparation, and that might expand from there on. But at least an hour or two of an orientation. And then that onboarding time period, I would say a minimum of 12 weeks is a period of time. You're not training them the whole time of those 12 weeks, but you're thinking about them in that mode of, I'm still onboarding them. They are still learning. There's still things that they need to understand about the way this business runs. There are situations and circumstances that they've never had to deal with, right? So maybe today it's sleeting and I actually haven't talked to them about how to do that. And so I need to recognize they're still onboarding. They're still facing those circumstances throughout these period of time that I need to be prepared to train them on. And so when we think about like rules of thumb, there really aren't. It's really about an approach of recognizing that your employee is not going to come on day one ready to do the job exactly as you want them to. They're not going to understand it. They're not going to feel a sense of belonging. They're not. And so you really have to figure out, how am I continuing to onboard them? And in onboarding them, you really are still recruiting them to retain them to stay in your job. And so really having that approach too about it is that you're still trying to convince them that this job is worthwhile and that this is a good place to be. And onboarding does that, because you're showing them that I care about you, I care about this work, and I'm willing to invest in you.
Flip the mindset, right? A lot of the audience, the owner operators, they've lived on that ranch or that farm their entire life. They know the ins and outs of it. So flip it around as if it was your very first day there. What would you like to know? If you do that, you're really setting yourself up to understand a little bit better what we're trying to accomplish.
Well, and it is really hard to not know what you don't know. I think that's actually the hardest part of orientation and onboarding for people who've done it their whole lives. They just, it's almost like the air we breathe. They assume and know that it's there. And, we always talk about this. If you take a fish out of water, the fish didn't know it was in water until it was out of water. And so in the same way, they're not going to recognize all of the things that are intuitive to them that they need to do. So it really does take some time, and talking to somebody who maybe they're not even your employee, but talk to somebody who's never worked on a farm before and say, if I brought you on here, what are the things that you wouldn't know how to do? What are the things you would want to know? How do I, continue to build? Every time I bring on a new employee, I should be constantly adding to that checklist of things that I need to go over and things that I need to address. I should be growing and developing that and refining that process so that I can be intentional in that way, because it is intuitive. And we do, whether we want to or not, we expect you to come right away and contribute and know how those things work. But one of the things I'll tell people is that if you don't invest in training those people, you're not going to retain them. And if we don't retain them, every time you lose somebody, it's like you lose the capacity to ever leave your farm business, right? To take a moment or a day off because you don't trust your people enough, because you haven't invested and trained them to be at the point where you feel confident leaving there. And so you have to be able to invest in them to see those dividends of being able to leave your farm for a little bit, being able to actually expand your business in any of those ways. And so it's not just the negative parts of that turnover, but you want to grow them to the ability where they know your business just as well as you do. And that's, can be scary, but that's actually the goal.
Yeah, you've mentioned retention a few times here, because I think this is the right time to ask about the ROI of this. It just feels it's different than, say, the ROI on an investment. Where we're able to, you know what I mean. But we are, if you think about it from an investment standpoint, we are making an investment. That's actually what we're doing. And,
Absolutely.
And so talk about the ROI of putting in this kind of work.
Well, so I'll flip it both ways. So people will talk about time and again the cost of turnover, which can be anywhere from 100% to 200%, give or take, depending on salary and wages for that time period and kind of the way your business operates, but at least 100% of what the salary and wages would be. And so when you think about the loss right there, that's something to be thinking through. But also when we think about what would be the gain, right? So with a structured onboarding process, you can realize about 20% increase in your satisfaction with your new hires is what we see for management. We see 50% increase in productivity of those new hires and 58% retention of new hires after 3 years with the organization. Other things, if you're looking at just the training and development, some easy stats is if you don't have good training programs, you're going to see 40% of resignation. 94% of employees say that they would stay at a company longer if it invested in their learning and development. And I mean, you're just going to see these stats all over the place. So when you think about what you could lose, but what you could gain is also there. And so when we talk about retention, it's not just about, okay, I just have to find another person to fill the job, but it's the time that it takes for you to then go do that other person's job. You're no longer managing the farm. You're doing the work that you wanted that person to do. And you're falling further and further behind on your production, goals and where you're trying to meet. Number two, you're not having that sustainability of your business. You want to be able to, again, leave your farm and not feel like you don't trust anybody there. You want to be able to have people who care about your business as much as you do. And just the advancements and the limitations, but we're just so scared and don't have the time to do it. But you don't have the time to not do it either. So, I mean, I understand both ways, the challenge there.
We'll get back to the Mind Your Farm Business podcast, but first a word from our sponsor, RBC Royal Bank.
This episode of Mind Your Farm Business podcast is brought to you by RBC. As an agricultural producer, you're putting a lot of thought into your operation every day. You probably have more than a couple of ideas on how to handle challenges like market fluctuations, unexpected weather, or simply weighing the pros and cons of adopting new technology. But knowing where to start? That's where a solid risk management strategy can help. Visit rbc.com/risk management to learn more.
From the aspects of ways to go about this, there is the side by side along with the employee and showing them the way that you want things done from your company's perspective that could be unique. One way of checking cattle at one ranch is different than another. There is going to be some differences there depending on the preferences. What about I think of simulators. Like I think of like an F1 simulator where a driver gets used to a track and the response of the car to that track through simulation. I saw this at a farm show once. I believe it was John Deere. They had a simulator there of a combine where it was as real as you could possibly imagine this combine simulator. These are things that I wish we would see more of in agriculture because they really provide that experience, that those miles in the seat where it's not real life, but it's virtual real life.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it would expedite things tremendously and also probably reduce the risk of injury and all sorts of things, right? If you were actually getting to simulate some of the things that you just can't do unless you do. And so I would love to see those things too. Some of the simulations that could occur from working with livestock, understanding different scenarios and situations. But what I would say for most farm businesses that are out there, that's really beyond their means that I have seen. And I don't want to speak to other, that's not really in the realm of my expertise. But what I would say is that you can simulate situations, and in fact, actually, when you think about some of the training and development that you could do, I've seen a lot of farm businesses actually have great success with creating some of those simulated experiences and actually making it kind of a team building, team bonding sort of, competition in different ways. And so definitely those things are out there. And the other part too is that you don't have to be the one who is sitting side by side with that individual. It's really important if you have other people, you should be creating sort of a succession plan and some mentoring and keying them up with somebody who's experienced on your farm to be training them in specific ways, letting them shadow different people. Or you can create, again, some of those simulated experiences by giving them a project that it's okay if it fails in this one area, and allowing them to develop some confidence in failure and it being okay. I think that's really key. And when you're sort of amping up the competence of somebody is to, nobody wants to fail in a big way and be able to come back. That's a really hard thing to do. So it's really important that when you're developing a person, that you're developing them appropriately in that sort of challenge and support range, right? With enough challenge, but also providing them with enough support that they're excited about that development themselves. And they want to continue to seek out greater challenges because they feel safe enough to do so. And I think some of those psychological safety topics are not things that we discuss a lot, but it's a key reason why people leave, when they feel like they're just being embarrassed or they're just being ridiculed in an environment, they're not going to stay in that environment. And so it's really important that we are really creating the environments that we want to do. And, I think what you just said about that simulated development, right? How can we create some experiences where they can practice and figure it out without, causing any cost in a negative way to your farm, right? That'd be great. I'd love some more of those kind of experiences out there, but I know they're less available than we would like.
Yeah, in the simulator, if you pull the 60-foot cultivator into a telephone pole, you just restart. Yeah. It's a little bit different than real life. Now, in this onboarding, if we're doing it correctly, we're putting the time into it. There's the experience, the kind of the case study way of doing that, as you just described. There's also the other component of that. Talk about the need for the feedback and the communication to have those, corrective actions, so to speak. Like, okay, I saw this. We need to fix it. Here's how I would like you to do it. Talk about that.
Yes. And that should be from day one. That should be in your orientation saying, this is how it's going to flow. I'm going to say this and why I'm going to say this. Even setting up that expectation of our relationship is going to be coaching style is really key. That expectation of, I don't expect you to know it. You're going to get things wrong, and getting it right and doing it my way is going to be really key for our business's success. So even I think setting up that as an expectation is really key, but that should flow throughout, and not just through that first year or two of onboarding or however long, 4 months, whatever you're thinking of it as, but really throughout an employee's career. And that's one of the things that I see time and again, where supervisors and managers, they wait and they sit on things. They complain to other people about it, but they never talk about or address it because we're afraid of that conflict. But if we really set up and our goals are, hey, we want our business to be productive, because actually I want you to own that desire as well of our business being productive together, then you're going to be able to tell me ideas or issues or concerns you have with our business, because you may have some ideas or know something that I didn't see. And I'm going to be able to give you that feedback too. And we're going to set up that flow and that expectation throughout our relationship. But that starts, again, before you hire, and saying, this is the way I work and supervise. And people actually want to be held accountable. They want to do good work, but the problem is the way we do it, and even our emotional attachment to that feedback, right? When we come to it and we're nervous to give it, and we come or we yell or the way we provide it is so negative. But instead, if we set an expectation for ourselves and for them that it's going to be a coaching model where I'm going to be able to kind of give you feedback of how to do that better, and I'm going to expect you to make mistakes, it's a totally different environment and experience for both individuals.
When it comes to the training, how much should we get the employee involved in the thinking about the areas where they'd like to be trained? Because there's different ways to do it, right? It's like, I want you to go to this course because I see value in X. Or think, are there areas where you're curious, or areas where you feel you need to improve, or building on strengths? Talk about the different ways you can approach that.
Absolutely. One of the things that is really key, again, is getting to know your employee remember, not just filling your work void, but actually who is this worker? Who is this person? And what are their goals and aspirations? And when you can come alongside and meet those and figure out how we can, again, make the goals of my business and the goal of my employee align, you're going to see that productivity. And so, really getting to know your employee. What is it that they are wanting to do with their career, right? What are the gaps that they see and the things that they'd be excited about learning about? What are their passion and interests? Because we have somebody who is getting to develop that and getting to share their actual strengths and talents, they're going to be a much more engaged employee. And so, and you actually probably don't want them to have the exact same expertise as you, because then you just have two of you, and you're going to expand your business capabilities when you have diverse strengths and team talents coming together to serve your farm.
Fascinating. Let's finish up with resources. What resources are out there besides this podcast episode, of course, what resources are out there that people should look to try to assist them in building a program? And I'll include in that question, how complicated does this need to be? Like, how official? Maybe that's the way to put it. Complexity. Yeah. We need to avoid the corporate 4-inch ring binder, but having something written down probably does help us here.
Yes, absolutely. And so what I would say is it's less about, to me, the 4-inch ring binder and everything documented. Documentation helps you to be repeatable and helps you to be intentional. So that's key. I do think that some sort of plan, even if that plan is sketched out, but okay, here are all the topics I need to think about and discuss with them. And that's a growing list, right? That's changing. Here's the best timeline for when that should occur. Here's the best people to actually train them on. Here's some ideas that they talked about. And I'm going to kind of be working to develop that. And that could be in as simple as a, little journal that they're keeping in. My dad always had his little idea journal in his front farm pocket, right? And he was constantly thinking through those and thinking about how he could do things better. And so it could be as simple as that. But the key is just that implementation, right? So, because sometimes I think people get so overwhelmed by the process. And I'm not an HR professional. I'm not any of those things. You don't need to be an HR professional, but you can certainly engage and consult. You could read the thousands of articles out there and probably feel like an expert after reading them, because it's not rocket science. It's really about thinking about what is it that a person needs to be successful, and how do I meet that need? How do I break it down and create a plan for that? And so, really asking yourself, do they understand their role in our organization? Do they understand, what our business is trying to meet those goals? Do they feel a sense of belonging and a sense of value, right? Are they connected to the people, the resources, and trained on the tasks that they need, right? And then what do they want to continue growing? And so some of those just small questions that you can be asking, and then that, I think, commitment to continually improve that process and improve your rollout of that is going to be helpful. But I always tell people, don't let what the ideal, all the bells and whistles intimidate you from just doing something and improving those processes. Because I think once people engage in it, they'll realize it's really not that hard. But they need that commitment and that urgency to do it. I think really and truly focusing less on the exactly what it needs to look like and more on, I need to do something, and I need to see and ask my employees, what do they need and what do they want? And I need to care about that. I think we have a approach of, I don't know what's wrong with them. I don't know what's wrong with this world, right? Why people aren't coming or people aren't staying. And we will have a tendency to blame. And I just really thinking, that's the situation. That's what we're facing. How do I take ownership and do something about it and do anything, right, to improve that? And we're going to see us able to move that needle in the situation.
Yeah, focus on the variables that you're in control of. So
Absolutely.
Think internal versus the external. I think I think you described that very, very well.
Yeah. And you see farmers that are doing this really, really well, that, they're able to invest in their employees, treat their employees like a family. Like there's a culture that people want to be a part of. And not only will you be happier as an employer, your business is going to be more productive. And it all starts again, though, with that orientation. When we paint the picture and vision of what we want this experience to look like and set them up for success, they will. But it does take a little bit of time and investment and patience that they're not going to be able to contribute from day one. But you're going to see that for the long haul. And I think really having that futuristic long-term perspective in our investment and really thinking of it in those terms are really what is needed.
Great stuff. Dr. Woodruff, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for being our guest today on the Mind Your Farm Business podcast.
Absolutely. So happy to join you, and best of luck to everyone who's thinking about implementing something like this.
Many of you probably have said to yourself, listen, it's sink or swim around here. You can either hack it or you can't. Well, to be honest with you, I know I have. The reality is that this is just not the best way to achieve greater success with new employees. Many say that programs like training and orientation they're costly. They cost money and time. We don't have it around here. Well, the data is pretty clear. The reality is that it's also costly to have to constantly be restarting recruiting for positions because we're not putting the work in as employers. Proper programming in the first period of employment gives you and the employee the greatest chance to still be together in a year. I hope you enjoyed today's discussion. If you have any feedback, comments, thoughts, please email me at shaney@realagriculture.com or call the Real Ag listener line at 855-776-6147. You can find more episodes of the Mind Your Farm Business podcast at mindyourfarmbusiness.com. Thanks to RBC Royal Bank. And until next time, keep on minding your farm business.